Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. My name is Andrew Salamatev, and I'm the program manager on the Microsoft Exchange team. And I've been working on the extensibility team, or the Mail Apps team, for the past couple of years on Apps for Outlook platform. Now, we have a lot of content to cover today, so I'm going to go basically beginning to end, and I apologize if I go over by a little bit, but I'll be sticking around after the talk. I have nothing else planned today, so if you have any more questions, feel free to come up to me, or I can give you my business card, and we can follow up over email afterwards. So let's get started. Today, I'm going to tell you all about the really cool and new features that we've added to Apps for Outlook and to Mail Apps since the platform debuted back about last February in Office 2013 and Exchange 2013. But before we jump into that, I'm a little curious to get an understanding of the audience this morning. So how many of you guys have never heard about Mail Apps, and this is the first time you're hearing or seeing them? Awesome. Don't be afraid to raise your hands. This is Bill. I expect a lot of people not to know. How many of you have heard about them, but you're not really sure what they are, and you haven't really investigated too much? OK. And has anybody built a Mail App so far? All right, awesome. So some of you guys are more or less experts, and you're curious what's new. Well, let's try and catch everybody up to speed. I wish I had a lot more time today so that I could show you demos of what we shipped last year and also demos that we've done this year. But let's try and just do a quick recap of what Mail Apps are. And there are three main points to understand about Mail Apps. And this is the version that we shipped last year, and so then we'll jump into what's new since then. So first of all, Mail Apps, or Apps for Outlook. Mail Apps is the term we use for developers. Apps for Outlook is the term that our end users are familiar with. So Mail Apps is a brand new extensibility model for extending Outlook, extending and customizing the Outlook client. And when I say Outlook, I don't mean specifically the desktop client. This model actually works to extend Outlook, Outlook Web App, and OA for iPhone and iPad. And actually, just as earlier this week, we also announced that there is going to be a native OA for Android app as well, and apps will be present there. The main point to take away from this extensibility platform is that it's based on web technologies. You should think of, and in the screenshot, you can see a LinkedIn app. And you should think of apps as being nothing more but a web page that a developer builds and hosts on his own server. And then Outlook puts up a frame around that web page. It literally frames that web page in. And then that web page has access to JavaScript APIs to interact with Outlook. But since the developer owns that code, since he hosts it, he can update that app whenever he wants. And there is no impact on the user, and there is no impact on IT. The app is just updated. Next time the user clicks on the app, he has the newest bits. This means that the platform is actually very loosely coupled with the client itself. Outlook can upgrade on its own, and the app can upgrade on its own. And there are no extra steps required for users to reinstall something or for IT to approve and reinstall something. They're going to be continuously compatible with each other. And finally, and again, the version of the platform that we shipped last year, we really stressed this notion that apps appear contextually. Now, there is a whole spectrum of what contextually means. Some apps can appear in every message or appointment. While other apps, and developers can fine-tune these, those can appear based on, again, specific entities, such as the presence of a postal address or the presence of a meeting suggestion in the text of the message, or based on regular expression patterns. So maybe there's a package tracking number present in the body, and then you have the app appear. And if there is no package tracking number, then there's no app. So they're meant to be very contextual and to provide extra actions and information that the user didn't have previously to help the user complete the task. The whole point and the power that Apps for Outlook provide is to keep the user in the mail experience. Users already today spend 80%, information workers today spend 80% of their day in Outlook. And having them context switch out just decreases their productivity. The whole point is to help them get things done and get things done faster on their terms, on their device. And that's what Apps for Outlook do. So LinkedIn, this is an app that is in our Office store today, and it enables users to quickly take a look at who is on the current thread. So if you get a meeting invite or if you get a message from someone you don't know, you click on LinkedIn and quickly get an overview of who they are, what they're about, where they're from. But as I mentioned, there are other types of apps for Outlook, and those can be much more specific. And in this case, we're actually looking at an example of a Bing Maps app. And this app is available only on messages that have a postal address. And so here, we're mapping the address. Now, there have been other extensibility platforms in Outlook and also in Outlook Web App in the past. We've had Forms extensibility in OWA, or Outlook Web App, and we still have Outlook add-ins today. But there are three main reasons why this platform is better than what we've had in the past. First of all, as I already alluded to this, Apps for Outlook platform is cross-platform. It's cross-form factor. That same exact app, that same business logic that you write and that you host on that server will run in all Outlook clients that support the platform. Today, that's Outlook Rich Client, OWA, OWA app for iPad and iPhone, and as I mentioned, on Monday, we announced it's also in Android. At the same time, that exact same app, LinkedIn, will work in messages or appointments. So again, there's no need to modify your code. It just works. And user just installs it once, and it just works. So cross-platform is the first key value point. The second point is that, again, it's loosely coupled. You don't need to involve IT. You don't need to have users constantly install and reinstall like they have to do today with Outlook add-ins. And you can just update your app, and it just works. You have the power of the code, and you control the experience. And you can change and modify and update this experience anytime you want. And the last point is acquisition. So we do have an Office store available for users. We do have an Office store available, and developers can submit apps there, and end users can actually acquire apps from the store. They do not need permission from IT. This is the whole point around consumerization of IT, that end users themselves can empower themselves to be more productive by finding great apps in the store. But administrators do have more capabilities and powers as well, and so administrators for the organization can install an app from the store for everyone or for a subset of users. Or administrators can actually just build app, or they can have an IT development team within the organization, just build an app just for their org and install it for themselves and not deal with the Office store at all. So there's a lot of flexibility as to what can be done. OK, so let's check out what is actually new in the platform since the first version that we shipped. And in terms of what's new, there are three main features that we're going to talk about today. The first is body and attachment access, and simplified body and attachment access. And I'll go into why this is important and how to work with this. The second point is commerce. Since February of this year, you can now sell mail apps. You could not do that last year, but since February of this year, you can now sell mail apps in the Office store. And the last part, and that's what we'll spend most amount of time talking about, is, and this is what we're most excited about, it's this feature Compose. You can now have apps not only while users are reading messages, but also when they're composing or writing messages or appointments. And we'll go over scenarios for that, as well as I'll show you guys how to write some code. And we'll talk about what really cool things you can do with Compose. So body and attachment access. Let me actually introduce why is this important. Why is accessing attachments? What kind of scenarios would you want to use for accessing attachments? So I'll switch to my demo machine real quick. And this is a scenario that many of you may be familiar with. So if you've bought or sold a house, or if you've ever worked with a legal team, you might have received contracts in your email asking you, hey, could you please go off and sign this contract and then get it back to me as soon as possible? And today's experience is extremely painful. I get it in email, I have to go print it out, walk over, sign it, scan it, email it back to myself, get the scanned version, hit reply in the previous message, attach it, and send it back. So this is really annoying, and this is not how document signing should be working in our world today. So a mail app can actually help you simplify that whole experience by keeping you within it. We've worked with a partner, DocuSign, who've developed their mail app to allow users to quickly and easily sign attachments or sign any contract or attachment they may have gotten. So what I just did is I signed into DocuSign from my Outlook web app account, from my O account. And now they've downloaded this attachment. They grabbed it. And now I can click a button, Sign Attachments. And they're going to process it and process it a little more. But eventually, they'll show me the document. And now I can just drag the signature on, hit Finish, give it a moment to prepare the document, hit Compose or Apply. And now what DocuSign did is I signed the document, they downloaded it, I signed the document on their server, and now they have even abolished the whole notion of attachments. They're getting away from it. Instead, they just include a link for the user to go so I'm going to hit Send. And the user now, oh, I'm sorry, I was actually still attaching the attachment. That's why it popped up that question to me. But the user now gets a link to the attachment and gets the signed attachment. This is all it takes. And as I mentioned, apps exist on devices as well. So if I was in the airport and I realized, oh man, I really forgot to sign this very important document, and I'm about to fly off to my vacation, hey, I can pop open my phone, again, 3 clicks, and I'm done. Click and drag the signature, and I'm done. And this is the kind of power, this is how we can help users become more productive with their daily lives and daily activities. So before we jump into the code, real quick, why did we need to do work here? Well, last year when we shipped the platform, it was possible to access attachments. But the problem, it was very problematic. In order to access attachments, the app had to forward the entire message to an SMTP endpoint. Then that endpoint, owned by the developer, would have to parse the message, extract the attachment, and then do work on it. And OK, so first of all, it was extremely cumbersome, just putting up an SMTP endpoint and then parsing the message and grabbing the attachment. But second of all, there were user implications as well. First of all, users would just wonder, hey, why am I getting these forwarded messages in my sent items folder? Who's forwarding this? And what is this account that my contract for my house is being forwarded to? What on earth is this? But second of all, and even worse, end users couldn't even install this app. Because in order to forward a message, this required the highest permission level, and only admins can install apps with the highest permission level. So if an end user even discovered this app in the store and said, hey, this would be really useful for me. I work in the legal department. I deal with this every day. They couldn't even acquire it. And this is the problem that we went to solve. And so we had 2 main goals. First of all, end user apps can access body and attachments. So end users can go ahead and install these apps. And second of all, we really wanted to optimize for bytes over the wire. And what does that mean? Well, that means that if you noticed in the DocuSign example, or even in many other examples where you're accessing attachments, the bytes themselves, the attachment bytes, are necessary on the back end in order so that you can save it off somewhere, you can do work on it, you can process on the attachment. So it doesn't make sense to take the attachment from Exchange, move it up into OWA, transfer it into the framed app, and then from the app, transfer it back to the backend. It would make much more sense to provide an identifier to the app and tell it, hey, from your backend, go into Exchange and grab the attachment. And that's exactly what we did. So the new design is that there's a JavaScript API to access attachment metadata, a token, callback token, and the Exchange Web Services URL. Exchange Web Services, if you're not familiar with it, is a very powerful API to communicate with Exchange. And it allows you to access any item in Exchange and do business logic operations on it. So with the JavaScript API, the app can get an identifier, a way to authenticate to Exchange, and the endpoint of Exchange. And now you can guess from here what's going to happen. The app passes all of this information back to its backend, and then the backend uses this information to call Exchange Web Services and actually grab the attachment. And finally, a couple of notes on the callback token, or what is this token all about? The point of the token is to extend the concept that apps can read any property on the current item. We do, as I mentioned, we have multiple permission levels, and I'll talk about that a little bit later today. However, one of the permission levels is called read item. And just as you might suspect, it allows an app to read any property on an item. Well, in the past, this wasn't true. Apps couldn't get access to the body. Apps couldn't get access to attachments with that permission. So we are changing that. More on the token, because it's supposed to allow an app to read any property on the item, it is bound to that item. You cannot call get attachment. You can't call get item, or you cannot access the body of any other item. You can only access the body of the item that the app was opened on. And again, the point was, while the app is open, the app can access attachments or it can access the body. So we've made the token valid for only 5 minutes. And this is to simulate the session-bound concept. OK, great. So enough talking. Let's actually see how this would work. And I'm going to switch to my laptop. And so here I'm using Visual Studio Ultimate 2013. And I'm going to go to File, New Project, select App for Office. And let's call this Now I get this wizard, and I'm going to select Mail App, hit Next. And here I'm being asked, do I want the app to appear in read or compose form? Well, we're working with attachments in read, so I'm just going to uncheck compose and hit Finish. And what's happening behind the scenes is that Visual Studio is setting up a project. It's actually creating me a web project, if you guys are familiar with those. And it's going to take a little bit to set everything up. It's generating some templates for me. So it's going to generate a basic HTML template. It's going to generate some JavaScript. And here we have the project already set up. So what we're looking at, and let me increase the font size. So what we're looking at here, this is a template that the project starts with. I haven't written any code yet. But it's already pretty powerful. I'm not going to run it just because we don't have the time, but I will show you what it looks like later. But this is a great, great starting point. So you create a brand new project, hit F5, and just go and see what it does, and then go back to the template, and now you can start playing around with it. So let's take a look at some attachment APIs first of all. So I'll show the attachment name. We'll call this. And I'll also create attachment size. And finally, let's add one more. Let's say attachment type. Perfect. And now, so this is the HTML part. This is just the UI. So let's take a look at the JavaScript business logic, where we use the Office APIs in order to interact with attachments or anything else in Outlook. And so I'll go into app read, and then home. And this is home.js. This is the corresponding business logic file that Visual Studio creates. If you want, you can simplify everything. All you need is HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and you're done. Again, think of it as building a website. So again, in this template, the first thing we'll notice is that we invoke this office.initialize method. And that's just like query. We need to initialize our Office APIs. Now, once we've done that, now we can invoke some interesting methods. So here we call a helper function display item details. And this is exactly where you see us interacting with the APIs. Now, the actual Office APIs are right here, office.context.mailbox.item. That is an object model. So it represents the object that you're working with. Notice that it is item. It is meant to be abstract. If the app is loaded in a message, item is really going to be a message, and it's going to have message properties and message methods. If the item is an appointment, it's going to have appointment properties and methods. If the app was loaded in compose form or in read form, again, it would have different properties and methods. Some the same, some different. So it's an abstract type. Now, you can imagine the problem that we would have if item is abstract. So what happens when I click on item dot? What IntelliSense do we show? everything. So that's not very useful. So what we did is, and unfortunately JavaScript does not have a way to cast. It's not an object-oriented programming language. So what we did is we actually invented our own way of casting. And this is what you're seeing here. We're calling it office.cast.item, because we're casting the item, to item read. And now we only get read APIs. And so when I click here, you can see attachments. And that's only available in the read form. And so we only have read APIs. Now, there are a number of these. You can do to item compose. You can do to message compose. You can do to appointment read. So there are all sorts of different combinations that we've created. But these functions themselves, to item read, doesn't do anything. So if you're not using Visual Studio, don't even worry about it. It's absolutely useless to you. But if you are using Visual Studio, this is the only way you can control the IntelliSense that you get. Literally, all it's used for is to cast so that IntelliSense can show you the correct methods and properties. OK, so right here, we're looking at subject, and we're doing, and so we're setting the subject text field to be item.subject. Pretty simple. And I think what you'll notice as I show a couple of examples is that interacting with the Office object model is, first of all, very simple. And second of all, it's very short. The vast majority of the code you're going to write is UX, business logic, backend. This is all stuff you know. The point of Office.js is that it's just super simple. Just grab the properties that you need, grab the functions that you need, and that's it. There's minimal ramp up. You can use your existing web technology skills today to build apps. So here I'm going to hit name, and we add the name. Now attachment size, same thing. Attachment sub0 dot size. Oh, yep, thank you. How's that? Good? Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't memorize, so I have to do this on every page. And I believe we had attachment type, but I'm just going to double check in a moment. Item.attachments. Attachment type. And let me just make sure that I got all my variables correct. So we have attachment name, attachment size, attachment type. And here we have attachment name, size, and type. Perfect. So this is very simple. Let me just show you how this works. Oh, and to get the EWS URL, so it would be a little bit different. You would call office.context.mailbox.EWS URL. So EWS URL is specific to the mailbox. That's the Exchange Web Services URL. So therefore, it's a property on the mailbox. And finally, if we wanted to get that callback token, so if we wanted to get the attachment of bytes, we would call office.context.mailbox get callback token. Now, this is an asynchronous method, so we have to give it a callback function. It's asynchronous because every time you call it, we go off to Exchange, mint a brand new token that's good for only 5 minutes. So while the app is open, you can keep getting tokens, but they're only going to be good for 5 minutes. But we'll get back to that. So at first, let's run the simple example here. And so I hit F5 or play, and the first thing that pops up is a dialog asking me for username and password. Why? Well, because the mail app has to be installed in some mailbox, Exchange mailbox. So I'm going to give it my demo account. andreasay@magiclabs.onmicrosoft.com. Now, you can easily provision this demo tenant for yourself as well. You can just create a trial tenant in Office 365. This is exactly what I did. It's good for a month, and you can play around with it very simply. The next step that Visual Studio is doing, and this is why it's spinning, is that it's trying to discover my settings. So it's trying to discover where's my Exchange mailbox, finds it, invokes the install method, installs the app, then figures out my Outlook web app URL, launches IE for me. Now I'm going to select my account, log in, give it a moment. And this is, yep, so we completed document signing. Fantastic. And so here is our attachments build sample. Launch the app, and there we go. And so we have the attachment name, the size, and the file. So printed everything out. OK, great. Well, let's say we wanted to do something more interesting. So let's say that we actually wanted to access attachment bytes. There are actually two demos I want to do, and unfortunately I'm going to have to be rushed here, but they're both very important, very interesting. I already posted the code, and I'll share the link where I posted the code, so I highly encourage you guys to go and check out that code. It's not a super clean demo, but it's a sample that shows you exactly how to do things. So first I'm going to show you how do we access attachment bytes. Let me walk you through that code so that we can speed things up a little bit. So here's a project that I already created. If you take a look at the HTML, so just to go back to the HTML, it's very simple. All we did is add a getAttachment button. But let's take a look at how that button functions. What getAttachment does is, again, something very simple. So we grab the attachment ID. Excuse me, that's the identifier for the attachment. Next, we grab the EWS URL. And finally, we get the callback token. And in the callback function, once that returns back, we create this attachment data object. And then we invoke this method called sendRequest, and we send along the attachment data. What is the sendRequest doing? As you can see, it's calling XHR. What it's doing is it's calling a backend service. So again, the backend service for my app has to go and download the attachment. Now, the template app for Office project that's created does not have a backend service for it. So what I did is I utilized the new web API, I guess infrastructure in .NET, and I just created a new controller and a new web API. There is a fantastic blog post by one of my colleagues that walks you step by step how to create that. So I'm not going to show that to you, but I will show you the URL where you can go. And literally, you can go step by step with him and do the same exact thing that I have here. So let's assume that we already have, because we already created this controller and we have this backend service. What do you do now? Well, let's take a look at the backend service. What happens here? So this is the method that gets invoked, and we pass in the request. And then we pass in the request into a private helper method. And so we pass in the ID, auth token, and EWS URL. Now here, we're constructing an Exchange Web Services method. And so in this function, we've constructed it. And then here, I'm creating web request, pointing it to EWS URL, setting the auth token as a bearer authorization header, make a call, grab the attachment, and it gets saved. And so let me just run it real quick and show you guys what happens. Now, Visual Studio cached my login credential from previous time, so this way I didn't have to input them again. And what we're doing in this sample is we're going to save the attachment to a folder. So here I have the folder up. There's nothing in it. And let me select the download attachment, click on Get Attachment, give it a moment so it's grabbing it's downloading the file saved. We'll look back, and there's the contract. So we've saved it. OK, this is a little more interesting, but it's still not there. What if we did something even more interesting? What if we decided to capture this attachment and save it to our OneDrive? How would that work? Well, let me show you. Glad you asked. But before I show you the code, we need to cover couple of concepts real quick to understand how this is going to work. So in order to save an attachment to SharePoint or to OneDrive, and I'm going to show you how to do this in Office 365, I'm going to utilize the new REST APIs that SharePoint has exposed. And those depend on a couple of steps. First of all, I have to register my app as a web server app in Azure Active Directory. That's something that, again, I'm not going to show you. I already did behind the scenes. But I will show. I have a link that shows you how to do this. The second part is that we have to create implement an OAuth flow. And the final part is that once we do OAuth flow, and this is just a very standard OAuth flow that you guys must be familiar with in order to authenticate. And the final step is that the backend, after the OAuth flow, will have a token that it can call into SharePoint to save this file. The really interesting part is how do you do this OAuth flow? And so to do OAuth, there are a couple of steps we have to do. So here in the diagram, you can see we have Outlook, we have the app in a frame, and we have a little button called Launch OAuth. We'll call it sign in, call it whatever you like. But when the user clicks on it, what our app is going to do is create a new window. So it's going to pop open a new window. It's going to point it to Azure AD, and this is standard OAuth. And Azure AD is going to ask for the user to consent. User clicks grant consent, and then Azure AD redirects to the app's HTML page. So there is a redirect URL. Again, standard OAuth. But now in this redirect page, Azure AD includes as a URI parameter an access code. And the app takes that access code, sends it back to the backend, and the backend takes that access code, exchanges it for an access token with Azure AD. And now that you have the token, now we can call the SharePoint REST APIs with this token and actually get the attachment. OK, so switch back. So this is the project for doing this. This is the project that actually interacts with SharePoint, with everything. And I think the main thing I did here is I added an OAuth controller to handle all of the OAuth flow. And then I modified our getAttachment controller, from the one that I just showed you. So now it has a couple of methods. It has the SaveAttachment method and the SaveAttachment method calls getAttachment, and then it invokes the SaveAttachment. And in here, this is where we actually invoke SharePoint APIs. Again, the code is posted. I'll show you where it's posted. But let me just run it for you to see what this entire experience would look like. And so I hit run. Give it a moment to load Outlook Web App. Perfect. Log in. Give it a moment to launch Outlook Web App again. And here's our contract. And I'm going to open OneDrive. And so here we can see it's empty. There's nothing here. But let me click on my attachments demo. And I'm going to click this Provide Permission button. It's going to launch a new window. It's going to point it to Azure AD. Now, because I tested this demo about 100 times, I did not delete the permission in the delegate table in Azure AD. It's not going to ask me to grant access. What you will see is the new window to Azure AD. Because I've already given access to this app, it's immediately going to redirect to my app's page. So just pay attention to the URL or to the address bar. And so there it goes. It already redirected. OAuth succeeded. Fantastic. So I close that, click on Save Attachment to OneDrive. So now we'll give it a moment to actually save the attachment and invoke the SharePoint API. We'll give it 2 moments. Success. Go to OneDrive. Where is it? Well, let's refresh OneDrive. And there's our contract. So we've saved it. So I know I went very quickly through this, but again, I encourage you to take a look at the deck for the flow and take a look at the sample. And this should actually enable you to do some pretty powerful things. You can save to SharePoint. You can save anywhere you like. But the other takeaway is that if you want to build any other app that interacts with SharePoint, you can use this flow. You can use these ideas. And that's the other point that this shows off. Awesome. So enough on attachments. We've talked about attachments quite a bit. Resources, here are all the links that would be useful and interesting to you. And the code is posted there. So you can go and grab it. Now, the code won't work immediately for you because it uses my client ID, my client secret, and it's hard-coded for my SharePoint URL. But if you go to those documents, you can create your own Azure portal. You can create your own client ID and secret, put those into my code in the OAuth controller. Create hard code your URL for your tenant. You can use my pattern there. So I kept my pattern. You just replace the name of my tenant for your tenant, and then it'll work. So since you guys are devs, just a little bit of tinkering should do it. Commerce. All I'm going to say here is that, so this is the second main point. We've launched this in January. All I'm going to say here is that you can now sell apps. So before you could only give away apps for free, mail apps. You could have sold other apps, but mail apps you could only give away for free before. But now you can sell mail apps, and you can give them. You can sell them either as a subscription model-based model, or you can sell them individually for $1, $2, $100, whatever you think is right. And there's documentation, again, posted on how you handle entitlement tokens and validate that the user actually purchased the app. Okay, and let's jump to to what I think is going to be the really interesting part of our talk is Compose. And the best way to introduce Compose and Compose apps, I think, is actually via a demo, just to show you guys what these look like. And so I'm going to switch back to my demo. Discard. And so here I'm looking at an email that I get quite frequently from various people. They ask me, hey, Andrew, where's this documentation link located? Now, today, in order for me to pull this up, I have to open my favorites bar, go to the URL, copy and paste it out of the address bar, switch back into Outlook, and paste it in. And when you talk about there being lots of URLs, or lots of questions about, hey, where's this URL? Where's that one? Where's this other thing located? It becomes pretty messy and hairy and frankly annoying to constantly have to do this. So wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be simpler if I could just click on reply, and for those URLs that I frequently paste in, well, what if it was just in an app, like this My Templates app? And I click the button, and there it gets inserted, and then I send it back. What if it was that simple? What if we could do the same thing on a phone? What if we could, and I'll pull up my phone, Windows Phone. And yes, Outlook Web App is supported on a Windows Phone. It's also supported on your tablets if you want to try it out. This isn't the native app. You can see that this is IE. But what if I could do the same thing on my Windows Phone? And so I hit the Apps button, tap My Templates, hit Insert. Did that turn blue? Yes. And paste that in. Now it just takes me 3 actions to get to something. I don't have to memorize it anymore. But what if we made it even more powerful? What if we said that, hey, it's not only URLs that you can insert, but what if we allowed you to actually insert powerful HTML templates? My Templates is an app that ships with every Exchange account. If you go and provision yourself an Office 365 account right now, My Templates will be there. It's an app we developed to show off the power of apps. So let me just create a random template. I'll call it announcement. And then I have Word up here. And so what if I click on, let's say, new flyer, create. And this is an HTML flyer. So this is all HTML. I'll just copy it out and save into here, hit save. So this is our announcement template. And hit insert. And now if I'm a guy in marketing and I send out lots of newsletters, hey, this is super easy for me. I can just create a couple of these templates in Outlook, and now I can insert them all over the place. Whichever client I'm in, my templates persist. If I switch to Outlook Rich client now, this announcement will be there. And I can go ahead and edit it so it's not static, so I can change it to my band or whatever the name of my band is, and keep going. And this template is pretty powerful, but it also demonstrates a very powerful API that we've enabled. You can insert rich HTML content. You can make it super easy for your users to insert rich HTML content, links, references to videos, anything that's going to be valuable into Compose for users to interact with. But there are other motivations for Compose apps as well. It's not just about creating messages, or it's not just about helping you author content. What if I just wanted to send out a very simple survey to my friends? So maybe I want to ask, when do you want to have lunch? Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. And maybe I also want to ask where. Barbecue, Chinese, burgers. I can hit Save Questions, and I'll send this to myself so that you guys can see the other experience here. So I just hit Save, saved, fantastic. And now I hit Send, and that's how I send a survey. Now you might say, well, there are voting buttons in Outlook Rich Client. Yes, but they only allow you to do one question, and that doesn't exist in OA, nor does it exist on the phone. This app is everywhere. And so I just sent this message, and here's the other cool thing. This app actually activates both in Compose and in Read. And here we're seeing it in Read. And so in Compose, it allows me to create a survey. But in Read, it allows me to vote on it. And so I'll vote for Monday, and I'll vote for Chinese. And what it does in the background is it sends out the response mails back. These are just some of the things that we can do with Compose apps. OK, so when we talk about Compose, there are three parts that I want to talk about. I want to tell you about activation when Compose apps are available. I want to talk about capabilities. What can they do? And then I'll tell you a little bit about permissions. How does the security and permission work? So in terms of when apps activate, when apps appear, it's very simple. In Read, they're contextual, so you have lots of rules to play with. You can base them off of regular expression. You can base them off of entities like postal addresses. In Compose, very simple. Either the app is in message, or it's in an appointment, or it's in both, or it's not there. That's simple. And the same app, as I showed you with voting, can activate in Read, and there you have all the power of regular expressions and entities, or in Compose. So it's, again, that same exact app. It appears in both cases. And it can appear across messages or appointments. And Compose apps, as I also demonstrated, they are across desktop, tablet, and mobile. So I showed you desktop and mobile. But if you want to grab your Surface and point it to OWA, you'll see a special native touch UX for tablets. It's in between the one screen, or it's in between the mobile screen and the desktop screen. We call it two-column. And you can play around with apps there as well. So it's across all form factors. Now, in terms of what can they do, the best way to think about what can Compose apps do is what you see is what you can read or edit. So that Compose form, what you see on it is what can be edited or read. So first of all, Compose apps have access to core JavaScript APIs. So the user identity token that you can use for single sign-on. We have a great article on how to do single sign-on in our documentation, so I encourage you guys to take a look at that. They can make Exchange Web Service requests. It's a limited set of Exchange Web Service requests that they can do right out of the app, out of the app.js instead of the backend. They can grab settings. So it's just a property bag for the app to save some things. We save our templates in it. So My Templates saves the templates in settings. So it's always available. And the user profile. So you can localize to his time zone. You can get his name. You can get his email address. Obviously, Compose apps can read or write recipients. They can read or write to the subject line. Compose apps can add attachments, so they can add file attachments. They can add item attachments, so meaning if you have an ID for another message or another appointment, you can just call a method and add it. They can write to the body. Now, they can't read the body. We haven't gotten there yet. But they can write to the body. And there are two ways to write to the body. You can either prepend to the top, or you can write to where the cursor is. And if the cursor has selected something, you can overwrite that selection. Now, if the app is activated in an appointment, the app has some more properties that it can use. So it can get or set the start or end time. It can get or set the location. Add, again, attendees are available. And the last API that's interesting is custom properties. And so custom properties is a property bag for each item. So each item, you can save flags on an item. You can mark up an item, basically. And this would be interesting, for example, to say, yes, this message has been tracked. I already tracked this message. And so unlike in Read, here, custom properties are saved on the sent item. Why? Well, because when you compose the thing, it went away. You sent it out. So there's nothing on it. And just real quick, permissions. So last year, we shipped a model that had 3 permission levels. It had restricted read item, and it had read-write mailbox. And we introduced this new one called read-write item. So if you call read item, you can access all of the get APIs. So you can do item.subject in the read mode, or you can do item.subject.getAsync in the compose mode. But you can't call things like prepend to body or add file attachments. In order to call those methods, you have to ask for a read-write item. And end users, they can install apps that request the first 3 from top down, first 3 permission levels. But the last one allows a certain set of Exchange Web Service APIs. And those are pretty powerful, and they can be pretty damaging. So we really wanted to have a very secure model, and we constrained it so that only admins can install apps that ask for a read-write mailbox. So if you remember all the way back to attachments, that's why end users couldn't install DocuSign before. But that's why now they can, because of the work we've done there. OK, enough slides. Let's take a look at what we can build. And so I'm going to switch back to, what am I going to switch to? I'm going to create actually a new project. Let's see if it asks me to save. Nope. Compose, build, sample. App for Office. OK. I'll select Mail App. And here I'll uncheck Read Form, and I'll only keep Compose Form. But I could have left both. Again, it's creating a set of templates. It's setting up the project. So we'll give it a minute or two to think things through and give us a sample. OK, great. And let's take a look at the HTML that's right in front of us. So if you remember, in Read, it was a little bit different. There was a table, and the table just printed out static values. Well, here, we don't have static values to print out because the user can modify the subject or the recipient at any point in time. So instead, we provide buttons. You click the button to either set something, or you click a button to get something. That's just what the template is like. You guys can build your own projects. But let's add to this a little bit. So here we already have a button to set the subject, and we have a button to get the subject and add to recipients. So I'm going to add a couple more buttons. So let's add a button to, let's say, write body. And let's add a button to add file. And let's add one more that's going to be set start time. So we'll try this out in an appointment, and we'll set the start time. Or actually, we'll try it out in both. So let me save this. And then now let's go take a look at the corresponding business logic file that was generated. And here we can see we've set up click events for these three. And so let's take a look at what they do. So here, again, we're back to casting. So we have office.cast. And we're casting this item to item compose. And we call subject.setAsync. And we're setting hello world. Notice the get subject. It's different, again, from the read aspect. This is an async method now. Why is it async? Well, it's async because, again, the subject can change any time. We want to get the latest subject. So that's why it is asynchronous. And then we have to pass in a callback function. And this is this anonymous function. And to get the actual subject, it's result.value. So it's always going to be result.value to get the value of any async method. That's the pattern that we've introduced in Office.js API. So any async method you call, you pass in some parameter here, and then to get its value, you'll call that parameter .value. To add to recipients, we have this function here. Again, we just invoke to, so it's going to be, we're casting item to item compose, and we call to that add async. And here we pass in an array of just one field. It's my user profile.email address. So this demonstrates a couple of things. First of all, this is how you interact with the user profile. It's context.mailbox.user profile.email address. It's going to be the current user's email address. And second of all, this is how you add to the to line. Again, the main takeaway is that you only need 1, 2, 3 lines of code max to interact with Outlook. Everything else is all of the business logic to build for making your scenario work. It's all stuff you guys already know. It's very simple to ramp up here. OK, so let's add a couple of our methods too, or our functions. So I'll add write body dot click write body, and then we had add file dot click add file, and finally we had set start dot click set start. I just scrolled all the way down. Let me just make sure that I got all of my variables correct. So write body, add file, set start. Perfect. And now we create functions for them. Function, write body. And here we'll just do office.context.mailbox.item.body. And I'm going to do set selected data async. I could have called prepend async, but I'll call set selected data async. This just writes to wherever the cursor is in the body. And we'll just do something very simple. But we'll actually introduce, or I'll show you how to do HTML. So here I'm inserting HTML into the body, not just plain text. And this is how you would do HTML. Styles have to be in line, but we're just adding bold. And here's the trick. You have to specify a coercion type. If you don't specify a coercion type, it'll be treated as plain text. So if you want it to be HTML, you got to do something like that. Now, we don't need a callback function because we're not going to do error checking. Function, here we're adding a file. office.context.mailbox.item.add. And so here we have two choices. We can add file attachment or item attachment. We're going to add a file. Now, the file attachment method takes in a URL. Why? Well, because we continue extending that notion that, hey, if your app has the bytes, don't send them up, across, and down into Exchange. Just tell Exchange, hey, Exchange, here's the URL where the attachment is. Go ahead and get it. And so here, well, I have a URL for us to try out real quick. So I'll just paste it in. And we need to give the attachment a name. So I'll just grab the name of the file. And then the last function that we're going to do is set start. And here we'll create a date variable because we'll set the start time to be something interesting. So new date, and let's do date.set hours. Let's just set it to 6 a.m. And then why not have a meeting that early? Context.mailbox.item.start.set async date. Again, very simple. It's just one line to set something. And OK, so we saw how to write this stuff. Let's run it. So again, Andrea Say at magiclabs.onmicrosoft.com. My password, which is almost password. It's a new project, so this one doesn't have anything cached, so that's why it's taking a little bit to rediscover all of the URLs again. And here I'm going to type in my name again. Whoops. Hit sign in. So we're going to log in. Give it a moment. OK, and I'll create a new mail. Here's apps. Here's our sample. And let's just check it out real quick. So we can set the subject. I can call get the subject, and so here it is printed out, hi, down below. This is, again, all done by the template. Template comes with its own CSS and pretty cool stuff. Here I can set add myself to the recipients list. We can write to the body. You can see the bold right here. We can add the file. So remember, we hit that URL, and here I can just show you that it was added correctly. So here are our Siberian puppies added. And finally, if I hit set start, we'll hit an exception because there is no start field on a message. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my calendar and create a new event and go to apps, open the same exact app, and then watch the start field because it's going to change immediately, and it'll be very quick. So just watch this part. It says 10 a.m., and there it goes. It goes from 10 to 6 a.m. So we've just changed it very quickly. So that's Compose Apps. Again, I hope you notice that interacting with the APIs is extremely simple. It's not involved at all. And the vast majority of the work is going to be in actually implementing the really cool scenarios that you guys think of. And so what scenarios will you think of? So in the remaining time, I want to leave you guys with this. When we set out to build Compose Apps, we sat down and we thought a lot about what kinds of scenarios can we build. And we thought up a lot, but then we realized that there's no way we'll ever think through all of the scenarios, and that the partners that we speak with and developers that we talk to, you guys will come up with things so much better and so much cooler than anything that we can that it's going to blow us all away. But to help you get started thinking about scenarios, to help you get started thinking about how can you make users more productive, and how can you really push, move the needle and push the bar on what that experience with messaging and with using third-party software is. We came up with a list, and we came up with a couple of buckets. And so the first bucket that we thought of were a set of apps that can help you with writing a message. So we saw My Templates app. It's an app that helps me write with frequently written snippets. But that one's very simple. All it does is the user creates a template, and the user saves it, and the user can then insert it. But what if we had an app that runs in the background that figures out messages that, or URLs that you send out frequently and automatically creates these templates for you based on the frequently sent URLs? You could have an app that allows a user to have multiple signatures. So if users send mails to some customers, they need to use one signature. They send mails to other customers, they need to use a different signature. You can have apps like you saw the voting survey. You can just send out a voting survey. Or maybe even send out a payment to someone. So somebody, you owe $5 to someone, so you go click on pay this guy, and you fill in the payment info, and you process a transaction. You can imagine apps that allow you to book a conference room. So you could imagine, like if I need to book a conference room that's external to my meeting, or external to my organization, I could just go use this app, and it allows me to hooks into some APIs, allows me to discover external conference rooms. And then it allows me to finish filling out the appointment invite, and it finds the meeting room for me, and I hit book, and it books the conference room based on the start time, the end time of my meeting. Or even a hierarchical address book. For certain parts of the world, they prefer to figure out who to send the message to based on the organization structure rather than just typing in somebody's name. But there are other buckets as well. You could imagine another class of scenarios around template messages and meetings. So if I'm a marketing guy, or even if I'm not a marketing guy, and I'm just a person who sends out lots of gift cards, or I'm a person who sends out lots of e-cards to my family, hey, there could be an e-card app that I just click new in my message, select the card that I need, or select the template that I need to send, and I can have a choice of, I could have a variety of different choices that I could use there for a template. These are rich HTML templates like we saw with the announcement message. Click insert, and it's done for me. And then I just edit a couple of fields, and I'm done. Or maybe there's an app that hooks up to my backend financial service system, and where I send a message to my customer, or I'm replying to a customer, and with a click of a button, it goes off to the backend, calculates how much money this guy owes me over the past month, creates that invoice, tells Exchange to add it as an attachment, and then I just hit send. With one click of a button, that invoice was generated, added to the message, and I sent it. And finally, we could imagine a set of scenarios around workflows. We saw document signing, but you could also request somebody to sign a document. Or you could use an app to request approval for a marketing campaign if there's a specific workflow to follow. If you need to specify, no, this person has to approve it first because they're the interim approver, and then there's the final approver. You could designate a message to be sent later. So some of us love this feature that, hey, well, I just composed this message, but I really want to send it out next week, or I want to send it out in 2 weeks. Well, you could just click on send this message whenever the right time is, using your Compose app. Again, just a couple of clicks. Or you could send out a survey or payment, as I mentioned. Or you could even track messages. So as you're having a conversation with someone, and as you're typing up a message, you might say, hey, this is actually a really cool idea, and I want to save this to my OneDrive location so that I don't forget about it. Like this is a pretty innovative topic that we're talking about. And that's something you could do with a Compose app. You could actually grab and save the conversation over into OneDrive using some of the APIs that I showed you today. So with that, the attachment demo code is posted on the URL. You grab the documentation on MSDN. We have one more talk today that's going to talk about other Office coding as a whole. It's Office Power Hour, and one of my colleagues, Rolando, is going to be talking to that. Highly encourage you guys to go. It's going to be very interesting. You can see what other cool features we've done in PowerPoint and in Excel and Word. But with that, I highly encourage you guys to check out our documentation. Think about what awesome productivity and other experiences you can build with mail apps, and go out there and build some awesome apps. Thanks, everyone. Available for questions, or I don't know if I think we're over time. Oh, yeah, go for it. I'll stay up here until the next speaker comes, and then I'll just hang around here, and you guys can come up. So go for it.
Okay, so first of all, this is related to I make Outlook add-ins, but for the desktop client.
Okay.
So this is a new area for me. How big is this market in terms of subscribers?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So it's all of Office 20. So it's Office 2013, meaning Outlook 2013, and Exchange 2013, because Exchange 2013 is required in all of Office 365. And Office 365 is growing at an extremely fast pace, and we're throwing a lot of we have a lot of push there, and we're seeing a ton of momentum there. It's growing super fast. So you have millions and millions of users, basically.
Okay, it's in the millions.
I actually don't know the exact number, but yeah. Anybody else? Yep.
Is it the Exchange 2013 on the premise? Does it
Yes.
support that?
Yes. So Compose Apps is new to SP1, but the Read apps, they were in RTM version of Exchange 2013. Yeah.
Are you thinking about how to enable this on native clients? I mean, for example, usually people use their native mail clients on their phones or tablets
Mm-hmm.
instead of using Office 365
Yeah.
applications.
Yeah. So we're actually so let's put it this way. For Microsoft clients, we are going to be working to get this feature into them. For ones that we don't control, there's nothing we can do, right? We don't control the iPhone's mail client.
Maybe to put some links on the email so people
Well, what we do is we're actually encouraging users to use our mail clients on those devices instead. We're working pretty hard to make that a much better experience than the native mail client. And so that's what I hope you'll see with OA for iPhone, OA for iPad, OA for Android. No, this works, well, again, so this works on Exchange 2013 and above. Oh, the clients. OA for iPad and OA for iPhone works on-prem as of maybe a month ago, I think, against on-prem. But it was recent, so, but it does work against on-prem. Yeah?
I'm doing a lot of auto integration with
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any plans for extending the API to contacts?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The question is around extending APIs for contacts. We do have plans for that. That does sound very interesting to us, but that's a little lower on our priority list as opposed to some other things. So we're looking at some UX improvements instead. So it's going to take a little bit to get there, but that is something we're thinking about. It is pretty important to us, yeah.